that time. We have reached that moment in the sacred space, the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. I hope you guys are doing all right. I hope you guys can hear me okay. I hope there's no weirdness with the sound or anything like that. I want to appreciate or give my appreciation for you all joining me. I was looking for a story. There was something very specific that I was looking for, which um, is why it took a little bit of time. But nevertheless, we're here. And I see my guest in the background, so I would like to bring him on. We are joined, if I can get this right. There we are. We're Dr. Issa Bloomy. How you doing this morning? You doing well? This afternoon for you. You doing okay?
Good morning, Jamal, and greetings to your audience. We are okay,
Uh,
I suppose.
Greetings back at you. And we're joined with Dr. Issa Bloomy. Give me one moment to get my glasses. He is professor, there we are, of World History and Middle Eastern Studies at Stockholm University within the Department of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. He holds a PhD in History and Islamic Studies at New York University and a Master's of Political Science and Historical Studies from the New School for Social Research in New York. Dr. Bloomy, I got to be honest, you were the first person I thought of when this story came up. And for some reason, my computer's acting weird, so I'll use my cell phone. There was a journalist an Iranian journalist, who pointed out that after it says several rounds of revision, a 10-point framework was produced, which became the basis for the first SNSC statement. The leader also added 5 conditions to the framework, including that there should be no nuclear negotiations at all. It says, despite the leader's written instruction, the Iranian side reportedly discussed the nuclear file. This made the Americans conclude that Iran did not really want to continue the war, and that if they push hard enough, they could extract concessions. It says, after Islamabad, the negotiating team sent reports to the leader. The leader reacted negatively and objected, saying that they had acted against their religious and legal duty by discussing the nuclear issue and failing to impose 10 conditions. Now, what they're arguing here in this, and I'll put this below the video just so people can see it, is that the leader was, for all intents and purposes, betrayed, that he gave orders and that those orders were ignored by the negotiating team in order to push forward with negotiations. I find that to be amazing. What will be the significance of that if this report is correct?
Well, there were suggestions that, and I've said on your show several times now, that there are big divides within two opposing camps, if not more camps
Yeah.
that are involved in this process of defining policy and pursuing a war of defense, self-defense, of a revolution that should be exported. There are, again, quite a few different iterations of what has happened in Iran over the last 20, 30 years. So if this were indeed verifiable, then it just kind of confirms what some of us have been saying, is that, and unfortunately, some of our most reliable spokespersons who come from Iran, who are regularly interviewed in the progressive media, are not availing. The idea that there's a united front, that somehow Iran is functioning with its full capacity to deal with an adversary that is hell-bent on destruction of Iran and fighting the global South, does not actually serve the cause. If we can't really start to appreciate the internal dynamics of Iran, then we're not going to actually be able to make the careful assessments that are necessary, let alone an appreciation for what could be done in the outside world. I mean, there's a lot of resistance out there that needs to have a better understanding of the limitations of Iran. I mean, the fine people of Yemen or of South Lebanon actually deserve better than to have constantly be surprised by the failure of a political class in Tehran to support its cause and to sabotage it even. And this seems to be an attempt by certain elements to work with the Americans to find accommodations for the platform that the Americans were seeking that would be politically correct in their own domestic context and their own relationship with the larger world. And in the meantime, try to ignore or sideline a well-established position from the very beginning of the revolution that goes back until 79, if not earlier, that we don't deal with the devil on terms that bend to benefit the operations of imperialism, of American and Israeli imperialism. And unfortunately, that seems to be regularly available in these negotiating contexts that are often well beyond the means of those factions that are trying to pursue a revolution in the terms that you referenced by this journalist, revealing the extent to which the supreme leader and those people around him are trying to regain the leverage that Iran has regarding its ability to build nuclear capacities, as well as fight a war of attrition against the Americans. So my apologies for the background noise. I'm not alone in the room.
You're perfectly fine. You're perfectly fine. Correct me if I'm wrong. Also, the supreme leader gave a speech, or he put out. I don't remember if it was a speech or if he put out a letter, but he basically pointed out he's against it. However, he's allowing the civilian branch space in order to operate. Am I getting that wrong, or did I misread that?
And again, we are dealing with, we have to rely on certain resources to give us this information. I think there's an active campaign to distort and confuse the extent to which there is a position that counters that one who's willing to make concessions. And I think that is generated from within Iran itself, from certain sources of information that disseminates statements from these factions. And so we don't actually, I think, through the medium of information that's transmitted from Iran through these various providers of information, it's very hard for us to know if, in fact, these statements are true or not. So I'm afraid I can't confirm anything, General. That's I'm sitting in the same position that many of us have at the outside, but I'm just able to or think beyond the kind of presentation of information and find actions and policies somewhat contradictory. So just 1 second, I'm going to mute you for 1 second.
You're fine. Okay, so I accept that. I do accept that. I guess from my point of view, the hardliners, currently, one of the other things that are taking place. So let's just put a pin in that part and accept that there are elements that seems to be a lot more oriented towards a willingness to negotiate. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because there are people in Iran who actually do pay attention to, who, like, for example, the protests that were taking place, where there was a huge number of protests that were taking place that was against the deal because the belief was that the supreme leader was against the deal. This was taking place internally in Iran itself. So I do get it. Like the idea that there's no way to know as a flat fact whether or not the supreme leader or whether or not the journalist that was reporting the information on the supreme leader are effectively being maneuvered. Fair enough. We don't know it as a flat fact from the standpoint of the journalists. But I would say, though, that there are people in Iran who I do pay attention to, who I've even had on the show, who are pointing out that there seems to be some level of disagreement between, let's say, the IRGC versus the political leadership, with the political leadership being far more willing to make deals as opposed to the IRGC, who seems to be more hardline on this point. Is the Strait of Hormuz open or closed? I'm getting mixed messages. I mean, there was a report that came out today, right here, saying that ships are, for all intents and purposes, stalled. Shipping stalls in Strait of Hormuz after Iran declares key waterway closed again. This came out Monday at 8:05. I have to be honest with you, the reporting has been going both ways about whether it's open or whether it's closed. If it's closed, what does that mean to you? Does it mean to you that Iran is, regardless of, let's say, some contradictions that may be in the leadership, which is understood? I mean, like, I guess I'm saying any country under pressure that is in some kind of war would have divisions in regards to the way they're thinking about how to pursue their aim. So that's not necessarily anomalous. I guess what I'm asking is the fact that the shipping in the Strait of Hormuz is closed, if this is indeed true, that would mean that Iran is strongly defending the MOU despite the political leadership being willing to compromise. Or am I getting that wrong? Give me your take on this.
Well, coming to an agreement under the MOU and have a position that if you don't actually pursue the MOU and the conditions, and therefore you can retract and basically pursue and use new leverage to try to get the belligerent party back on board of the MOU. That's something that could be within the framework of the liberals themselves. They are negotiating on terms that improve their own objectives with the future of Iran at stake, or what they envisioned for that part of the world. Now, again, we're dealing with a party in Israel that is actively sabotaging, if we actually do consider the Americans here somewhat at a loss about how to control their puppet colonialist enterprise we call Israel. If indeed there is a level of frustration amongst those in Washington who want to sign some kind of meaningful long-term agreement with this party that they have been working with, whether in Muscat or in Islamabad or in Geneva. So maybe this is a gesture. Again, we can't verify if indeed the Straits of Hormuz are actually closed, or if it's a selection of ships that can make their way through. This can take a couple of hours to verify, and then suddenly all ships who have made the necessary arrangements and got approval from the insurance companies can proceed once again. So it's this is a really a precarious way to understand and analyze the scenes behind closed doors, is to see any kind of reports coming from media about the relative success of the MOU and Iran's role in standing behind the agreement. So again, the idea that the liberals themselves are incapable of actually maintaining and pursuing a policy and an interest, and leveraging that capacity to demand certain agreements be fulfilled, then we really are allowed. I don't think these are absolute puppets. I think they are, in fact, very much have their own kind of cadre's interest, which needs to attend to the problems of opposition within Iran. The supreme leader, the Revolutionary Guard, the more radical elements who have long been revolutionaries and supported the idea of Iran actually sustaining a war with evil, whether it be on the basis of religious foundations or more ideological kind of revolutionary principles. Clearly, we have an element that wants to rehabilitate Iran and are more than happy to sign an MOU with the United States that, for instance, allows American mining companies to make deals with Iran, which what immediately followed the report of the MOU, which to me, again, reveals that Iran's revolution is very much at a stage of being stalled, if not reorientated to no longer support a revolution in the larger region. If you're going to be making deals with mining companies that have major shareholders who are based in Israel and who are international players, and if you want to work towards opening up Iranian economy for business with the outside world, you're not a revolutionary entity anymore. You're not fighting the system. You're not fighting the structure, the underbelly of what makes our world such a disastrous and unlivable place for the vast majority of us. So that, I think, is at play. And many Iranians want, as I've said before, want to be part of the larger global economy in a formal way. They don't want to work through Chinese or Russian intermediary or Indian intermediaries. They want to be a player. And those people who want that can and do have leverage, including participating and supporting the idea that the Iranian military can use its resources to continuously reiterate demands. They're not capitulating. They're not willing to surrender Iran's entire wealth without some kind of immediate reward for making these compensations. They're not there to be completely bullied out of the money-making process that comes with being a rich country. Iran is a very rich country, and there are people inside Iran who want to benefit from availing Iran's wealth to those who are willing to pay considerable amounts of money for it. So that does not necessarily include revolutionaries who are saying, there is a higher cause. And material sacrifice, what Iranians have sacrificed now for 30 plus years and have fought wars of attrition with Iraq and with the American imperial empire and Israel for decades, who are willing to, again, bite the bullet, materially speaking, certainly don't want to see the end result being that American mining companies get access to Iranians' natural resources again. But that's basically what's on offer with the memorandum of understanding. Now, as I was suggesting, the memorandum of understanding, its larger context is a structural shift that's happening in the global economy, with the Gulf actually no longer being the arena for a lot of the services that come with oil and gas industries, the refining, obviously the financing, but the transport infrastructure. There's going to be a lot of money in shifting it towards the Mediterranean. There's already put enormous amounts of resources put into waging war in Syria, on Iraq, and other countries to reorientate the oil production of the Gulf to servicing it, the European markets or China or Russia's markets by way of pipeline, not by way of shipping. Shipping is clumsy, it's costly, there's a much more cost-effective way of delivering Gulf, including Iranian oil and gas to global markets, and that's by way of land-based pipelines. And that's where we're going. That's what's going on in the Balkans. That's what's been going on in Ukraine for many decades now, with the whole post-Cold War transformation of the Soviet Union. And I'm afraid that the beneficiaries of Iran being integrated into this process are right now at loggerheads inside Iran with those who say, no, Iran is a revolutionary bulwark against capitalist imperialism. And that latter element is increasingly shrinking. The supreme leader, if indeed he is able to take a position without being marginalized, I find it outstanding that you would have a negotiating team that completely contradicts a very important circle and ignores basically an important circle of internal Iranian authority, moral authority, probably economic authority, and certainly political authority. So this reporter's revelations, which again, there was already clear from being an outside observer of all this, that there was tensions, that there were a selective use of, and I mean, put it in different ways, the Americans and others were basically picking with whom they wanted to talk and speak. and they were willing, and
Right.
there were Iranians willing to play along. And the ones that were considered dangerous and considered belligerent have been systematically murdered, assassinated, and when they are being replaced by like-minded radical elements, they have been, apparently, according to this journalist, verifying they have been increasingly isolated, marginalized. They are ignored when negotiations are taking place in Islamabad or in Geneva, and I think that's a real problem, and it's again not unique to Iran, right? Many societies, even in the United States, you have this kind of diplomacy by way of Jared Kushner and Wall Street, who do things independent of the State Department when necessary, independent of the executive branch, independent of American law, right? When it's not convenient, they find other means to actually pursue their interests. And this seems to be at play with these negotiations around the Straits of Hormuz, which, again, I'm not convinced that the Straits of Hormuz is a necessary long-term objective, is to keep it open and allow shipping to flow freely. There's too much money to be made when there's an oil crisis, and they can play and manipulate pricing. There's too much at stake by building new infrastructure that will redirect East Arabian oil and gas by way of land through a now very compliant Syrian government through Turkey to the Mediterranean Sea, and that will benefit and reflect the strategic calculations that are clearly at play with the destruction of Gaza, with the annexation of parts of southern Lebanon. And that has been a process that's been going on for decades. If you include the shenanigans going on with Egypt and their oil and gas since Camp David, if you include this whole discussions about Nord Stream, South Stream, the war in Ukraine, and Central Asian oil and gas, how it's been going through Turkey and Azerbaijan for these decades, that makes sense. And those players in Tehran who are telling the supreme leader that, you're marginal, you're not an important player anymore, there will be an inevitability that that whole class will be wiped out, assassinated, or marginalized. We're going to find a new Iran led by us globalists who want to make Iran part of a global economy. They have been at Davos. They have been in these economic forums set up in Europe and elsewhere. They have attended these meetings with the so-called BRICS. They are in business. And the Iranian Revolution, as it was expressed and lived in the 1980s, is a very different thing from the Iran that has matured into a viable, dynamic economy, polity, but conflicted. What to do with Iran's future. And many want, again, as I've constantly said on your show, they don't want to fight a revolution on behalf of Arabs, if I could be blunt. I mean, there's that kind of language and discourse in some circles in Iran. We're Persians, and we're a Persian civilization. We even saw the statement from the Iranian football squad. Ancient Persian values and traditions requires us to thank our host, even though they were treating us like crap in Los Angeles and forcing us to leave to Tijuana after playing a match. They left a kind of symbolic note, and they framed it as not a revolution fighting the devil, the United States, but saying, as Persians, a 3,000-year tradition, we must thank our host for allowing us to use the football stadium's locker room or something, right? So, these evocations, these kind of public relations gestures, is not one that you would find in the 1980s. Iran was very confrontational. There's an element in Iranian politics that it is not confrontational, that wants to do business, that wants to be part of the larger world. That's not all Iranians, but again,
Yeah, action of the government. That's it.
I'm repeating myself now, but it's something that we may see it manifest in the very fact that there was indeed a memorandum of understanding um, signed that specifically ignored the command of the supreme leader in regards to we're not negotiating our nuclear technology, our capacities to support revolutionaries in South Lebanon and Syria or in Yemen. De facto, there is no longer Iranian role in Syria. There is an abandonment of Hezbollah in many ways. There is an abandonment of Iraq in many ways. These are now conceded victories of Iran's historic enemies. And so that must be.
Well, wait a minute. Real quick, the memorandum of understanding and the first element of it, and the reason why I bring up the Strait of Hormuz is because if the Strait of Hormuz is closed, it would mean that Iran is vigorously, let's say, ensuring the sanctity of the memorandum of understanding. I am not of the belief that this is not going to end up in another conflict, but I am pointing out that if indeed the Strait of Hormuz is closed, they're doing so because they're making the point about Lebanon being inextricably linked to Iran.
I don't agree.
Meaning, even if these guys aren't revolutionaries, they are definitely aware and cognizant that Hezbollah is related to their own security. And I'm looking at this through a cynical lens. You don't see that as being like, even if these guys are just globalist businessmen, they do seem to be sticking with this idea of protecting Lebanon. Or you disagree with that?
I do disagree. I actually, that's my critique of that cadre inside Iran, is that they're willing to abandon
Lebanon.
Considerable leverage that Iran had in Iraq, in Syria, and in Lebanon over the last couple of years. I mean, the very situation that southern Lebanon is in right now, where you have a de facto annexation of significant kilometers of southern Lebanon. There's a full destruction of villages that it's a whole belt now. There's not going to be anyone ever coming back. So it's a de facto annexation. That is a military defeat to an extent. Hezbollah will keep fighting. They have no other recourse but to fight. Unfortunately, we're going to have Syrians coming in now, also playing a role in wiping out Hezbollah. That's going to be coming to play at some point. But Syria is a portfolio that Iran had maintained and sustained for a long time. And they, just like the Russians, turned their back on the Assad government, which was, whether or not it was sustainable is another thing, but there was considerable human and material investment in Syria by Iran until a certain point. Who made that decision? It was not Khamenei, nor his son. It was an element in Iranian who say that this is not sustainable. We need to find a new direction for Iran. Now, with regards to shutting down waterways, and this was a long problem I had with the narrative about Yemen's role in supporting the people of Gaza. They usually framed it as Yemenis shut down the Bab el-Mandab. No, they shut down traffic that was headed towards Israel. And the way media frames these kinds of operations, who de facto shut down the Red Sea was the Americans and the military that was sent to the Red Sea to try to destroy Ansar Allah. So that could also be at play at the Straits of Hormuz. We don't know who actually functionally tells the insurance companies, or the insurance companies tells the ships, we don't want you to go. We're not going to pay. We're not going to cover any damages on your tankers if you go through at this stage. We don't know who's making the phone call to put pressure on insurance companies, if there is indeed insurance companies. There could be UAE measures to try to stop traffic going through the Iranian-controlled part of the Gulf. The UAE has long had these territorial disputes with Iran and said that ships going through those waters are illegally breaching UAE sovereign territory. We don't know what's happening right now at 8 o'clock in the morning, New York time, what's going on in the Straits of Hormuz. We can't assume that this is a policy that is pursued by Iran until we get further details. Because again, this is
That's
how
right.
they usually framed the events in the Red Sea, was that this was all on the back and the shoulders of Ansarullah, where in fact there were other elements that were actually shutting down international traffic in total. So if there are ships that are willing to pay the fees and get and be chaperoned by Iranian Navy through its part of the Straits of Hormuz, that may still be at play. That may be still available. But maybe there may be elements outside of Iran who are saying we don't accept that. So again, the memorandum of understanding has been breached by Israel. In the context of Lebanon, and this is a cause célèbre for certain elements in our friendly media environment. That being said, there are other elements that also could be contributing to the fact that the memorandum of understanding is actually a useless document. We shouldn't be celebrating it as a victory in any sense. And evidence of that can be drawn from this reporter story, that there is a strong indication that whoever is making these negotiations is not listening to an important part of Iranian, historically speaking, Iranian power, and especially Iran's revolution. So that's my.
Could you explain that to the audience? How, because it's very different than the American political system, having these different power branches in Iran, like the difference between the political branch versus the IRGC, or for that matter, supreme leader. How do these things work in tandem with each other in one political system?
I will answer that. Just give me 1 second.
Okay. Oh, you're fine. All right. Issa will be back. I imagine he is probably a dad and he has kids. And so they're getting involved. And just so you guys would know, what we are referring to is this journalist. So he is reporting that. So right here, I'll make sure. Okay, let me bring Issa back in. There we are. Okay. I was just showing the audience the journalist that I was referring to and his piece. But yeah, I guess the question is, what was the traditional role for the supreme leader in Iranian, let's say, the Iranian politics? And what is it now? Does it still function in the same way? Because in the United States, they often act like the supreme leader is God-man, that everything happens in Iran is coming to the supreme leader. But that's not really true in practice. There are branches of power that work in tandem with one another. Can you break that down for us just so we have some kind of semblance of understanding of how this works in practice?
Well, this is one of the sad realities of how journalism and Western scholarship works. We personalize the outside world. I mean, we do that with the U.S. politics, right? It's Trump, right? Trump's government. And I mean, Trump's government is informed by a multiplicity of sometimes conflicted parties who are vying for. So, and the same applies with Iran. Iran is not ruled by dictate from a religious spiritual leader. In many ways, whether it be Khomeini or Khamenei afterwards, these are people who are vetted and elected by a group of scholars who have traditionally played an important role of an advisory role. They played a role of you would consult them and to verify if policies, if personal decisions were religiously were conjoined by religious teachings or practices or traditions. They were moral guides, if you will. And that was the formal function of Khomeini and Khamenei and his son, the supreme leader today. These are not the supreme leaders in terms of do they have executive power over the day-to-day administration of a modern state, let alone have absolute influence over the decisions made by various layers of a bureaucracy that has hierarchy. Some of them have their political loyalties with offices that are attached to the spiritual realm of Iranian politics. But there's a whole, I wouldn't say secular, but certainly a different realm, which is a functioning government that has to operate not by regularly bringing a list of questions to consult with the spiritual guide for Iranian Shia Muslim. It is a system of consultation, but the consultation takes place in different realms. And there's a parliament that is actually representative. There's an election of people who represent districts, and they attend regular meetings in parliament. Where their actual day-to-day affairs of state that reflect the concerns of a constituency that each MP represents is vetted in that environment. Laws are written there. They do eventually have to go through the equivalent of a Supreme Court, if you want to talk about in terms of the United States. And that is, of course, shaped by religious rulings. They cannot defy Islamic principles. It cannot, contradict what ultimately this cadre of scholars, if the problem is big enough, if it is an issue that is so contentious that needs arbitration, then one can consult judges who are religiously trained, judges who are often deferring to, if necessary, a hierarchy that includes ultimately at the pinnacle a supreme scholarly administrator, if you will, of Iranian moral health, spiritual health. But the idea, as it's often sold to us, is that there's a dictate that comes, and all issues that Iranians in a very modern society are facing is ultimately processed in the offices of Khamenei, is a crass Orientalist kind of accounting of how life is lived, how politics is conducted, how economic activity is conducted. Iranian, especially over 90 million people, very dynamic society, regionally very distinctive. If you go from one region to the next, you see that actually life is conducted in very different ways. Society is organized. It's very much decentralized. There is not this dominant, even the Revolutionary Party itself, the Revolutionary Guard itself, although it has its presence to maintain law and order and to influence politics. They have leverage. They do have influence. But that means they also have to engage in politics. There is politics in Iran. It is not a dictate coming from a single source. And this is unfortunately one of the weaknesses at times when you're at war and you don't have a military dictatorship. You don't have an authoritarian regime that has absolute power, that it has to regularly negotiate and make arguments, have to argue for certain policies. And increasingly in Iran, that we have seen a significant portion of those who hold power, legitimate power, they have had access, they've been able to gain through educational system, gain through working in government positions, as members of parliament, having portfolios inside governments and ministries, have been able to establish a loyal group who see that Iran has gone in the wrong direction. They want the revolution to be cast aside and pursue a different kind of future for Iran. And that's an indication not of a dictatorship. That's an indication of a very vibrant political environment. Now, in the past, the Revolutionary Guard, the supreme leader, they had significant influence over, especially the military and the police and Ministry of Interior. But even that has been diluted by new generations who never experienced the Iran-Iraq War. They never experienced life under the Shah. And so they have a very different orientation. They come with often a much broader background to understanding where Iran is. They don't have the immediate experience of the horrors that it was like living under the Shah or having to fight for survival in the Iran-Iraq war. And so this is the tension. You don't have a society, and I think it's a much more. I mean, we don't like the duplicity. We don't like I mean, they are very corrupted. I think they want the liberal elements inside, who are the ones generally position themselves to negotiate on behalf of Iran. And that may be a reflection of an internal coup that happened at some point. They've been able to gain ascendancy. There have been suggestions that there have been attempts to try to retract that. A more conservative, let's say the radical revolutionaries want to regain power. But if you look over time, clearly Iran has moved away from the revolution. I'm sorry to say that. We want a hero. We want a superhero to come and save the day. But you can't expect Iranians or 3,000 fighters from Hezbollah to fight an empire. It has to be done within the empire itself. I said that also on your show before. You have 4 million people showing up in the streets of Manhattan to celebrate the Knicks, but you can't get 12 people to show up to protest the fact that there's a pedophile rapist who's the president of the United States. I mean, it's on the Americans to do something about the world. It's on Europeans to do something about the world, not the Iranians.
Agreed. No. I'm not putting this on the Iranians. I agree that it's on the Americans. The Americans are the one that initiated the war. We're the ones that are backing the genocide. We're the ones who are doing those things. So I definitely agree. But as you point out, you can't get 3 people out on the street in order to acknowledge the fact that we're blowing up fishing boats, so we were attacking another country. I agree with your point. I guess my thing is, and I would understand why. Well, let me ask it this way. Do you think that this generation now, considering that they can see the predation coming from the United States, or for that matter, from Europe or from Israel, do you think that this generation, on some level, understands the previous generation a bit more now, considering the unprovoked wars of aggression that the United States has enacted?
I'm sure that there is a significant portion of Iranian youth who are still very proud of Iran's role in fighting for justice in the world. Whether or not that youth can actually gain access to circuits of power, are they the ones who get access to the Westerners who come, the journalists, and are they the ones who get into this cadre of who have now infiltrated the foreign ministry and Minister of Commerce or other ministries that seem to be now pursuing policies and interests that are contradictory to that revolution? Those who ended up on the streets, many of them were imported from Afghanistan, refugees who got a little money and got a telephone and logistically tell them what to do. We know that. We also know that there were a lot of Iranians who were duped or who actually do believe that they want to get rid of this evil religious element in their society. We have to acknowledge that. Do Iranians like to be bombed? No. And that certainly was a catalyzing moment. That was a big faux pas if the Americans actually think they're going to do a soft revolution on Iran. That's the worst thing you can do is basically do what was done, unless you're actually looking for something else. And I suspect that there is very little attempt to win the hearts and minds of Iranians by the American war machine, the Israeli, American, EU war machine. I think there's a different objective. They don't give a damn about Iranian feelings and sentiments. They don't want to win them over. There's not a game of winning over. They want to humiliate, to terrorize, and induce dissent by fact that, I want out of this hell. How am I going to get out of this hell? The only option I have is to overthrow the regime. The other option is for those, let's just do business. Some think that we can do a much more peaceable change and transition by becoming business partners, by curating the economic interests of those who do have some leverage in how Europe operates or how the United States operates. But as we've seen with Peter Thiel, I mean, we have actually a different kind of group of people who think they run the world, and they meet in private, and they consist of 200, 300 people. And their power is actually expanding.
Yes.
The concentration of wealth is moving towards this smaller and smaller group of human beings who now have no problem flaunting their they prefer to rape little kids. They have no problem sharing with the outside world what they actually do and what their ideals are and what they are looking for. No one is stopping them. They're literally telling us in our faces, and again, I've said this in your show. So those liberals in Iran are very naive, I think. They're stupid, they're unprincipled, they're materialistic. The very things that hurt Iran in the beginning of the 20th century is playing itself back. These are the ones who went to the West to get PhDs in the West, in Germany, in Britain. Very smart people, but unprincipled people, especially in the context of Iran, where there was enormous sacrifice. Still enormous sacrifice has been demonstrated. The ability of Iranians, basic, simple Iranians who don't have any connection to power, to be decent human beings, to actually care and have remorse for people in the outside world is very evident if you travel in that country, if we have access to those voices. But rarely do we actually allow those voices to supersede and overtake those who actually can speak in English, who can actually articulate, and often are pursuing an agenda that contradicts the interest of the vast majority of Iranians, and probably also a significant element of what remains of the Revolutionary Guard and those around the supreme leader. So we are looking at an Iran that is very divided, not in terms of 50-50. I'm talking about a small, empowered, liberal cadre who, again, the Europeans and the Americans and the Chinese and others want to talk to them. They don't want to talk to the revolutionaries. And they have the ability to actually pick and choose with whom they negotiate. And that has been manifested in the last couple of years. That was not the case at certain points of time in the 90s and 2000s. In the 1980s, Rafsanjani pushed his way through and was working with the CIA in Israel to rearm Israeli military. Completely corrupt. And he would then be later on reviled by Iranian society for what he did in the context of the Iran-Iraq war. But subsequently, a new generation has emerged with their PhDs from the West, with their embrace of Weber, and so they have demonstrated they are very communicable. They're accommodating. People like them in the West. Even these Americans have some medium of exchange. A revolutionary could not. They would throw up sitting across the table from these rapists and murderers and representatives of the Israeli project. These guys can make accommodations. They don't have that kind of fortitude to say, I have a principle, I'm not going to undermine that. Iran has a right to a capacity to produce nuclear technology for weapons if necessary to defend ourselves. These guys are willing to sell that. And that's clear from this reporter stories that there was an element that was going to ignore what was coming from Tehran. We are going to negotiate. We know what's best for Iran in the future, and that's to put on the table Iran's nuclear future, Iran's ballistic missile future, Iran's relationship with Syria, with Yemen, with Lebanon. And that's what effectively has happened over the last couple of years. And so we're seeing the kind of end result of that.
Dr. Blumey, I'll ask one last question. It was widely believed that the hardliners took, let's say, predominance after the attacks by the United States, but you don't believe that. You're saying not so much. The very fact that the Memorandum of Understanding exists in itself is indicative that the hardliners are not in charge.
Well, the liberals were always there. they were often outside of Iran when the bombing was taking place, or when they were in Iran. It would be the safest place, I think, in Tehran would be next to some of these guys, because there were clearly because there were clearly other guys who were being targeted. And we've already said this several times. Yeah. And so it is a vetting process. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who are in positions of authority that needed to be vetted out, to be cleaned out. And the hardliners certainly had an audience, but they were really pushing hard against something that is still not clear to me. It's not clear to us here outside what's going on. I don't think Iranians understand the struggle they had to make just to defend themselves. And I know it's because there was a lot of bad apples inside their inner circles, that there were a lot of people who were spying on them and who were providing coordinates for Americans and Israelis to hit targets that included human beings living in apartment blocks. And that is really, really a scary situation to be in when you're in the middle of a war that was clearly a war that wanted to destroy certain infrastructure, possibly invade and take over nuclear material, probably kidnap people, clearly willing to kill the supreme leader or anyone else who was representative of the radical elements. Yes. None of the liberals class was targeted for this. And so even at that stage, even during the bombing, the war itself, it was clearly mixed messages and a conflicted struggle. There wasn't a consolidation at some point of power amongst the radicals. They were able to clean out some elements, but the very fact that they had to fight and defend Iran and then worry about what was happening behind them, as somebody was, taking a picture using a phone. I mean, they had to completely get offline, right? If you recall, they literally had to take everybody offline. No more WhatsApp, no more connection to the outside world, because they just could not trust who was using this to help Iranians. Help Israelis and Americans bomb their assets. This is a very tough war to fight if you have an element in your own society who is willing to sabotage you. And that was clearly at play during the war, it's at play now, and as well as before. I'm sorry to say that that's the reality. I mean, that's not what we want, but that's something it's affecting how Iran is responding to all of this.
I do appreciate that. I mean, there does seem to be, like, for example, over the weekend where the IRGC comes out and says Israel continues to murder the Lebanese, the strait is closed. And then you got a report that came out after that a little bit later saying, no, everything is great. The strait is open. And so you look at that and you're like, okay, what's going on with this? And obviously there's a division in regards to Iran on this very specific point. So no, I appreciate your point of view on this, which is why I brought you on. I wanted to get your take on this. Thank you for this. Dr. Issa Bloomy. He is a professor of world history and Middle Eastern studies at Stockholm University within the Department of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. He holds a PhD in history and Middle Eastern Islamic studies from New York University. And he has a master's of political science and historical studies from New School for Social Research in New York. Professor, thank you for this. You be safe, okay?
Thank you. And you too. And to your audience.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Look, that may not necessarily be the most soothing thing for people to hear, but obviously any country that is in a conflict that is considered existential is going to have disagreements in regards to the leadership of that country. And so the reporter, just so you guys can see what we were referencing, and I probably should have did that first as opposed to just jumping immediately into the story, is this gentleman. So without going into the entirety of this, because we've already read parts of it, I'll just read part of this, or try to. Despite the leader's written instructions, the Iranian side reportedly discussed the nuclear issue. So basically what he's saying is, I'm sorry. If I don't have glasses, I'm not going to be able to see this. So what he's saying is, despite the leader's written instructions, the Iranian side reportedly discussed the nuclear issue. So basically what he's saying is, I'm sorry. If I don't have glasses, I'm not going to be able to see this. So basically what he's saying is, despite the leader's written instructions, the Iranian side reportedly discussed the nuclear issue. So basically what he's saying is, I'm sorry. If I don't have glasses, I'm not going to be able to see this. Long story short, let's see, I'll just show this. Long story short, the supreme leader, according to the journalists, gave, damn it. Okay. The supreme leader gave certain instructions in regards to the boundaries of the conversations that they can have with the Americans, effectively a core 10-point plan. This was apparently ignored in order to go further and negotiate, despite the reticence of the supreme leader. So it says, despite the leader's written instructions, the Iranians have reportedly discussed the nuclear issue. This made the Americans conclude that Iran didn't just want to continue the war, or they didn't want to continue the war, and if they push hard enough, they could extract concessions. Okay, this goes back to my original premise that weakness invites predation. The very fact that Iran went back on what they were saying gave the Americans this impression that they weren't entirely being serious, and more to the point, that there are various factions within Iran, and they can deal with one faction and almost pretend that the other faction doesn't exist. If we push hard enough, they'll come to the table and they would make concessions. Let's keep going. So right here, after the Islamabad, the negotiating team sent reports to the leader. The supreme leader reacted negatively and objected, saying that they acted against the religious and legal duty by discussing the nuclear issue and failing to impose the 10 conditions. Some SNSC members then wrote to him, arguing that the talks could not happen without the nuclear issue and warned without continued war, the attacks on infrastructure, and warned about continued war and attacks on infrastructure. The leader replied, quote, these negotiations would benefit neither worldly affairs nor their afterlife, unquote, and would not prevent Iran's infrastructure from being hit. After that, the negotiating team started messages exchanges, completely set aside the 10-point framework and pursued a new 14-point plan initiated by the Foreign Ministry, which became the Islamabad Ministry Memorandum of Understanding. Let's keep going. One example given by the quote non-interference unquote clause, the United States not interfering in Iran's affairs will mean shutting down some hostile anti-propaganda media outlets such as Iran International, Manitou TV. Basically, some of the provisions that you're putting in is also going to negatively affect us. Let's keep going. Only after these written commitments did the leader authorize a memorandum of understanding. Right here. It says, this is the context behind the leader's phrase, I had a different view. The leader was not merely opposed to parts of the final memorandum of understanding, he was against the whole post-Islamabad negotiation path once it moved from the original 10-point framework. This is where this kind of skeptical response came, where it seemed like he was saying, okay, I'm not really for this, but I will give the government grace on this, since this was the path that they effectively went with. If that's true, that is super fascinating. And that would explain, let's say, the letter that came out after the fact with the leader effectively saying, I had a different view, which made people believe that he was skeptical of the memorandum of understanding. Obviously, what seems to be happening is the US is trying to parse concerns. In one sense, to pretend as if they have no power over Israel while allowing certain inducements to go to Iran. I see Mark is in the background. I want to go to him. We are joined with the man himself, Mark Sloboda, International Relations and Security Analyst. Mark, how goes it, man? You doing okay today?
Tomorrow, I'm alive. How the hell are you? Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
We're all alive for the time being, up until the point where the world is destroyed in some kind of nuclear hellfire. But for the time being, I think we're intact. Mark, I want to start with, I got to start with the memorandum of understanding with you. I don't know if the strait is closed. I don't know if the strait is open. The most recent reporting is saying that it is closed. And if that is true, that would indicate that Iran is taking the memorandum of understanding seriously. Or do you see it that way? How do you view this?
Okay, so one thing is to say is there is an awful lot of posturing going on both sides.
Both sides, yes.
First of all, Trump has threatened to bomb Iran again, which has been pointed out by many people online, itself a violation of Article 1 of the Memorandum of Understanding, because it's threatening to use force against the other partner, which is expressly forbidden within the Memorandum of Understanding. But then the Memorandum of Understanding is exactly that. It is a memorandum of understanding. That means it means effectively nothing unless the other side is willing to drop the whole thing. So perhaps we shouldn't expect too much. Trump has also threatened that Iran needs to get its proxies in line, meaning Hezbollah. At the same time, it is actually, of course, Israel that is militarily occupying and systematically destroying, by their own admission, towns and villages in southern Lebanon, an act of ethnic cleansing and genocide. But of course, obviously the U.S. feels the rules are different for Israel and for Hezbollah. There is no indication. There has been some rhetorically through some members of the U.S. administration, there has been some increased criticism of Israel, more than we have heard before during the Trump administration, it must be said. J.D. Vance, the U.S. vice president, made the comment last week that Israel can't kill its way out of every security problem it has. Obviously, the Netanyahu regime in Israel feels quite differently about that. But there's no indication that they've done anything to leverage Israel. There's no indication that Israel has any intention of withdrawing from southern Lebanon, which has become a Iranian demand for continuing the Memorandum of Understanding. In the Memorandum of Understanding, it is specifically stated that the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon must be upheld. Certainly, I think that the Israeli military occupation of ethnic cleansing of southern Lebanon seems to violate that, but the U.S. appears to not agree. And they have given no indication that they are willing. When specifically asked multiple times by reporters about Israel withdrawing from southern Lebanon, whether the U.S. vice president or the presidential spokesman or the president himself simply changes tack and does not answer the question rather than answer it directly. So the U.S., the Trump administration, despite reports in Axios and everywhere about raised voices and the marital spats between Trump and Netanyahu, there is no indication that Trump has ever actually made Netanyahu, applied leverage to him in any way to force him to do something, certainly nothing significant like withdrawing from Lebanon. And that would mean, curtailing U.S. military and financial support for Israel. And I don't even think that is possible politically in the United States, much less by Trump. Yeah. So that would seem, if Iran insists on the Memorandum of Understanding as written, that's it. That memorandum of understanding dead on arrival. As we spoke before the memorandum of understanding even was signed last week, we discussed and we said exactly the same thing. However, America and Israel obviously assume that, well, first of all, that Israel is not going to withdraw from southern Lebanon and is not going to stop attacking Hezbollah. They might temporarily refrain from airstrikes on Beirut again for a time being, but that's about the extent of it. And Trump himself, in the last 2 weeks, has commented that as far as he's concerned, a ceasefire in the Middle East means more moderate shooting than normal. So, I mean, yes, that this seems to fit his definition of that. So Agreed. They know that Israel is not going to stop, and then the U.S. is not going to stop. More than that, they know that Iran knows that the U.S. and Israel are not going to stop the occupation of Lebanon and their military operations there. The American and Israeli assumption, or at least the American assumption, seems to be that eventually Iran will look the other way, as they did for most of the last 2 months of the first signed ceasefire over this account, where Israel was in southern Lebanon, was continually conducting military operations, expanding their zone of control, and it was only when Israel resumed bombing of Beirut, the Lebanese capital itself, that Iran responded. Although that itself was significant because Iran had never done that before. They had never hit Israel because Israel had hit Lebanon. That had not happened historically. So that was, right now, it is an aberration. It happened once at the beginning of last week, and it hasn't happened again since. But that seems to be the American exception, that everything else will go along, and that eventually the Iranians will accept that the war against Hezbollah continues until either Israel is exhausted or Hezbollah is exhausted, or both, as has usually been the case, actually. At the same time, Trump has been repeatedly suggesting, this seems to be his plan B, perhaps it's his plan A, that he would like Israel to basically pull out, and that he wants to sick Al-Qaeda from Syria, al-Jilani al-Shura, the Al-Qaeda ruler of what used to be Syria. And actually, he brought him to the White House on the 14th for a second visit and gave him more Trump brand cologne because Jilani said he liked the way it smelled. And since then, to my surprise, al-Jilani seems to indicate that that Syria could contribute to the security in Lebanon, which is, yes, of course, a vague answer, but that's already, leaving open the possibility that Al-Qaeda, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, if you want to call them Syria, that's fine. I refuse to call them Syria myself. Yeah. Could be sicked on Hezbollah by the U.S. and funded and supported, of course. And as far as Trump is concerned, that would still adhere to the spirit of the memorandum of understanding, as long as Israel and themselves weren't actively doing it. So that seems to be something that he is playing around with. I'm not so sure that Israel is convinced by that. I don't think they would be, because they certainly don't trust. Al-Jilani hasn't done anything against Israel, of course. When has Al-Qaeda ever attacked Israel? But that doesn't mean that Israel likes them or trusts them, having more control near their borders anyway. So that leaves us with Iran. So Iran has repeatedly Iranian officials have repeatedly made announcements from Friday through the weekend that they were pulling out of talks unless and until Israel stopped attacks in Lebanon, and then at various times we heard withdraw from Lebanon, as well as talks about Iranian exports and oil and everything else, and that there would be no meeting in Geneva. That was initially on Friday, and then of course the Iranians went, although they didn't go until Sunday, and that they continually made announcements that they were pulling out of talks, walking out because of Trump's social media rants while they were going on, but they never actually did that.
18 hours.
Yeah, they did. They did refuse a joint photo op with the Americans. That is something. But actually, coming even from Iranian officials, Araghchi and the Iranian foreign minister and others, they seem to think that great progress was made in these talks that were supposedly not happening because the Iranians were walking out of them. They're talking about, the 300 billion reconstruction funds. They're talking about sanctions and other things. But again, Iran is posturing, much like Trump is posturing, playing to a domestic political audience. And neither one of them is pulling out of talks. And it cannot be avoided, the fact that Israel is not only still militarily occupying Lebanon, but engaged, of course, in military operations there. Meanwhile, Hezbollah, the word is that Hezbollah has not attacked Israel, or Israeli-occupied Palestine, right, during over the weekend at the very least. But however, they don't shy away from the fact that, of course, they have attacked Israeli troops occupying and ethnic cleansing their country, which I think, of course, is entirely justified for them to do, right? So, I mean, you can talk about it. The U.S., right, continually talks about an Israeli right to self-defense. No, they do not have a right to self-defense. Hezbollah has a right to resist because Israel is militarily occupying and ethnic cleansing Lebanon. They are, of course, doing the same thing to Palestine to an even greater extent. No, Israel does not have a right to self-defense in that situation. And I would extend that. I and the Russian government do not consider the regime in Ukraine to be legitimate, right? But I would, never make the argument that Russia has a right to self-defense. That's not how I would describe the situation. The is going to fight to the bitter and bloody end, and I don't expect otherwise, and I would never make any comments to the otherwise and talk about self-defense in that situation. So, again, the two situations are not analogous as far as I'm concerned, but of course, certain people would try to make that, and I would say that. Ultimately, that seems to be where things are going to go down.
Doesn't Iran have to respond, considering the first premise or the first item in the list was Lebanon? And
it was the first item in the ceasefire too.
Yeah. Well,
2 months ago.
And I guess that's kind of my point, right? Doesn't it? The U.S. is doing the strategy of separation. Hey, we're going to give you inducements so you can sell your oil. Your sanction relief is intact. You can sell your petroleum chemicals, etc. However, Israel is a rogue actor. We can't do anything about it. Oh my God, Trump drops the
good cop, bad cop. Yeah.
Yeah, that stuff. Basically, it seems like the U.S. is trying to pry Lebanon from Iran.
That's what's been happening for the last 2 months. So,
yeah, but you can't make a memorandum of understanding, make it the number one item, and then retain credibility at the point.
Why not? It was in the ceasefire for the last 2 months too. I'm not saying that I think it's right. I'm saying that is what the U.S. is doing. That is ultimately what Iran has accepted for the last 2 months, except for one day when they bombed Israel back because Israel bombed Beirut. Other than that, they have done nothing. They have no, that's not true, because now it appears that they have shut or effectively shut the Strait of Hormuz again.
That's what I'm seeing.
That is not nothing, right? And that would be wrong of me to say so. So they have not resorted to kinetic strikes again, right? And you don't necessarily have to. They have other leverages of power. So we'll see where this is going. As far as Iran is concerned, right? The traffic through the Strait of Hormuz in the last week, of course, has only been a fraction of what it was, before this conflict started. At times, it has been significantly greater than it was at various times in the past 2 months, but it never approached even half of the normal traffic. And now we are told, what I read from tanker traffic analysts, is that on Sunday the traffic effectively halted. There was maybe 5 ships moving through, and those under the Iranian controlled routes, and that there was an attempt by one tanker to exit the straits using the quote unquote US route hugging the coast of Oman, and it turned back, obviously on orders from Lebanon. So they have done that, and of course that is their greatest power of leverage, and they're trying to use that again, rather than shall we say, ripping up the memorandum of understanding and going back to firing missiles at Israel and U.S. military bases around the region. I'm not saying they won't do that at some point in the future, but they're trying other options. They're very happy with the memorandum of understanding, other than Lebanon, and they should be, right? It is. Trump at one point said that he would only accept the unconditional surrender of Iran, right? And let's be frank, we have seen an almost unconditional surrender, but that of the United States.
Right.
The one caveat there, of course, is southern Lebanon. And I honestly don't believe that Iran is going to get southern Lebanon, right? I don't think that Israel is going to pull out, and if they do, it'll just be to stick Al Qaeda on them anyway. I would certainly wish it to be otherwise, but I don't see that Iran is going to go full scale war again, right? No matter how favorable the net result of that might be, it would, Iran has taken a beating, and anyone who pretends that they haven't would just be lying. Now, the U.S. wasn't able to stop them. It wasn't able to destroy its missile cities. Iran was continually able to do damage back to U.S. military bases across the region, very extensive damage, to do damage to Israel and to the energy infrastructure across the U.S. Gulf state allies that it was operating out of. But again, it would be lying to say that Iran wasn't bloodied and suffered damage as well. I think they got the better end of it. But that doesn't mean that they're eager to go another round if they don't have to. The U.S., right? Consider the way the U.S. views it. The U.S. views Hezbollah as Iran's proxy, and the U.S., historically and up to the very most recent time, has no problem throwing their proxies under the bus when that suits their interests, as they have done with the Kurds in the region repeatedly. Again, most recently feeding them to Al Qaeda in Syria. So they expect that Iran will be willing to do the same with Hezbollah if push comes to shove and Iran gets everything else or nearly everything else they want. Now, I don't think that is a correct analysis of the relationship between Iran and Hezbollah. But of course, that's the way the U.S. sees it. But it must be said that up until last week and one day, Iran has never attacked Israel because Israel attacked Lebanon. Never. That was the first time, and until we see more than once of that, that is a blip, not a trend, as far as I'm concerned. But again, threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz, again, is not nothing, and I would never say it wasn't. But ultimately, I don't think that the U.S. will force Israel to withdraw from southern Lebanon if they can. And I think ultimately that Iran will. Okay, so here's part of the problem is that the Iranian political leadership is obviously not unified on this. Right. And I've been jumped on before by well-meaning political activists and cheerleaders in the alt media community and fandom for saying that the Iranian government post the assassination of most of their leadership early on a few months ago, that there wasn't complete unanimous consensus on everything that they were doing, which that's fine. We need political activists and cheerleaders. That's great. There's certainly a role for that, but that's not my job. I'm an analyst, and I'm an analyst who tells brutal and hard truths when they need to be told. And the Iranian government is clearly not of one mind on this issue. And we know that because no less a person than the Iranian supreme leader, Mujtaba Khamenei, put out a statement at the end of last week saying that, all right, we'll go with this memorandum of understanding, but I don't like it. It's not my vision. Yeah. This is Pezeshkian, right? The Iranian president pushing for this. And we have to assume maybe other people, maybe the foreign ministry. He's the only one who is named. And that the supreme leader, that is not his vision. But he has been persuaded. However, the entire responsibility of this is on Pezeshkian. Now, remember, Pezeshkian was elected in Iran a few years ago after the tragic, quote-unquote, accident coming back from Azerbaijan that saw the former Iranian president, a quote, hardliner, Raisi, die in a helicopter crash. I don't believe for 1 second that was ever an accident. And I was clear about that at the time. And
people don't believe that was an accident. Yeah.
Anyway, Pezeshkian ran as a reformist, as someone who wanted, quite naively, in my opinion, to try to improve relations with the U.S., with the West. Well, how has that gone for you, buddy? I mean, just saying.
Yeah, the hardliners were right all the way through this. And yet, the reformists.
I'm utterly amazed that he hasn't been removed at this point. Yeah. And certainly the U.S. never tried to target him because he's one of the people that they thought they could deal with at some point. Yeah. So he was left alive. Well, the supreme leader said, all right, we'll go with this memorandum of understanding for now, even though I don't much like it. However, it's all on Pezeshkian. And basically he was saying, if it goes south, it's all his fault, and I will throw him under the bus. That was, I don't see any other way to read. I mean, I'm not going to verbatim read the whole statement, but that is, in essence, you saw the statement, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So you concur that that's what he said? Yes. So that, first of all, it certainly does vindicate me that there is disagreement within the Iranian political elite, but that's kind of a no-brainer. Of course there is. There's division within every government, every state, exactly. Right? Especially in such a situation that isn't some type of slur on them. That's just human nature, right?
Right. It's just like
so. But what it would appear that the supreme leader is doing is creating grounds, or the possibility at least, for removing Pezeshkian over this, if and when the whole thing collapses.
So
that would seem to be one reading of that statement. And certainly he's trying to divorce himself and the responsibility from this whole memorandum of understanding or agreeing to it. And I think we can safely assume that the IRGC does not like the memorandum of understanding either. And we know that, of course, the IRGC is, the real backbone of the Iranian military. And also it has had significant, if not dominant, political power in Iran before, and certainly since the war broke out, they have even more political power within the Iranian government than they did before, and that's again was a no-brainer. That was, if you killed off a bunch of the Iranian leadership and put them in a military defense situation, of course the IRGC was going to consolidate and take more power, but not such that they are standing in the way of the memorandum of understanding, at least. Again, because by and large, Iran feels that other than the detail of South Lebanon and one other small caveat, that they stop charging tolls/service fees for passage through the Strait of Hormuz for the 60-day quote-unquote negotiation period with the U.S. And then with the indication, there's a difference in the versions that were signed there, the Memorandum of Understanding. Because the Iranian version says only 60 days, and the American version says 60 days, leaving out the only. And since then, Trump has made statements that Iran will never be allowed to charge service fees or tolls for he said tolls specifically, will never be able to charge tolls for the Strait of Hormuz, and that if they did, he would bomb them again. And take over the rest of their country, like he has any control of their country right now to begin with. But he went further then, and on an interview in Fox News, suggested that the U.S. could become the guardian of the Strait of Hormuz, and they could collect the money and control all the money flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. And I mean, again, this is posturing. To a certain extent, you could say that this is posturing for a domestic political audience, or you could simply say that Trump is an unhinged madman who is completely divorced from reality and still refuses to acknowledge that he just lost a war against Iran.
Well, the thing is, in America, it is very clear that Trump lost, and people keep saying Trump lost. Yeah. And so what you're hearing,
New York Times, editorial board, right? Yes. Yeah. But so he refuses that.
Boost it, basically saying, I didn't lose this war. It was the greatest victory of all time. He's pushing back on what he knows is constant pressure of people saying he lost the war.
My clothes as God Emperor of mankind are beautiful. And don't you dare say that I'm not wearing any clothes, because I'll charge you with treason, New York Times.
Yeah, pretty much.
Which is literally what he's doing.
Yeah. It's outrageous. It's insane, because from our point of view here in the States, it's like, okay, dude, you obviously lost. We can read the document.
Yeah.
I mean,
he's an unhinged, mad megalomaniac.
Yes.
I don't mean that as hyperbole. I mean, psychologically, I think he's an unhinged, mad megalomaniac. And the Iranians obviously do too, because they brought senior psychologists into their negotiating team to help them understand the psychologically challenged person that they were dealing with. And that's according to Ryan Grimm, who has been talking extensively for Drop Site News with the Iranian leadership throughout the whole of the last couple of months. So that
just insane.
I could only say, well, I mean, first of all, it's great PR to announce that, but it's also probably true they do need it. So
yeah. Oh, I don't doubt it. I don't doubt the Russians. We're doing the same thing, like looking at the psychological profile. And by the way,
they always do. I mean, they always look at the psychological profiles of the people they're dealing with. That's like KGB / FSB 101, right? That's what they do. Yeah.
I want to move over to Russia for a bit. There are two stories, and there's more than two, but two that I think we can get to. I am very curious about why Zelensky keeps threatening Lukashenko. He continues to do it and continues to put, and if I'm not mistaken, he just put out some ultimatum and doubled down on the ultimatum against Belarus. What is going on with this? I fundamentally don't understand this.
Okay, so, I mean, Russia and Belarus are, of course, in a union state. And while Belarus is not actively participating in the special military operation, the initial attacks did come out of their territory. Since then, they have not largely. But of course, because the two economies are very integrated, right? Belarus has refining capacity, right? That adds on to Russia's own, and they produce extra diesel and fuel for which you can certainly make the argument helps the Russian military and other things. There's other military industrial dual use / other things going on there. But and Zelensky has now complained about that too, right? Saying that they should stop refining and that sort of thing, right? But I mean, as if Europe isn't completely 100% economic. But that's neither here nor there. But more importantly, the big salient issue here is that on the Belarusian border, evidently, a number of relay towers for drone relays have been set up on big towers along the Belarusian border. And this is part of Russia's asymmetric ways of approximating Starlink right now. It definitely helps them to use their drones more actively, under, direct control, particularly like, say, in West Ukraine or around Kiev and the like, where that would be much harder for them. That is the one real drone advantage. There's all kind of talks about drone advantage that Kiev has. Well, even with Europe and, assembling parts made in China and Taiwan and everything, Russia still produces more drones, and they produce much better drones on a bigger variety. And they have more advanced, like the fiber optic control and everything. But the one advantage that Kiev has because of the U.S. / Elon Musk is Starlink, and that provides global tiny constellation satellite coverage. Providing a signal effectively. They can control drones all over the world, really. As long as they've got the fuel to get them there.
Right.
So Russia was hijacking Starlink until a few months ago. And then Elon Musk, people came up with a workaround for stopping the Russians from using it. And that put them at a, shall we say, a disadvantage. And now Russia
Russia was using Starlink satellites for their
Oh
own
yes.
drones?
Oh yes, they were very actively using Starlink for their own communications to some extent, but more importantly for drone control. They were using it for more than a year. They were using it to a very great degree for drone control, right? Yeah. And I mean, that's just part of it because both sides regularly hijack each other's mobile phone networks to control drones too. That's done all the time on both sides. There's an electronic warfare level of signals for control of drones going on here, both to use them and to stop them. That is, kind of, shall we say, above the pay grade. It's kind of dense to understand what's going on there. But yes, Russia was very actively using Starlink until a few months ago. In fact, very much was made in the Kiev regime's propaganda in the Western media was that, Kiev was suddenly going to start completely dominating the battlefield because this was going to destroy Russian communications and drone control and everything. And of course it didn't. But Russia had to come up with, Russia is, first of all, they are rapidly putting their own Starlink network into space. It's called Rasvet. Of course, Elon Musk has thousands of micro satellites up there, right? Russia doesn't need quite that many yet, but they don't have a network yet. They're just starting, right? And they're rapidly launching every week more up there, but it's going to take time. And I think we don't know for certain, but I would be surprised if they have even a partially functioning network before the end of the year. China, by the way, is doing exactly the same thing at even greater speed. Right now, there's a Starlink arms race going on because everyone now recognizes the military potential of Starlink for control of drones, in the offensive against anyone, anywhere in the world now, and everyone. India, for instance, has just forbidden Starlink from setting up shop in India, at least legally. And is now talking also about building their own Starlink network. So that's going on. But until then, Russia has come up with various asymmetric means of approximating the advantages of Starlink control for drones. One of those is mesh networks where the drones communicate with each other, and they've increasingly done that, and the Ukrainians are complaining about how effective that is getting. That is not a full workaround, but it does part of the job. Then there's a few other things they're doing. One thing that both sides have been using is high altitude balloons serving as drone relays. So you put a high altitude balloon up there, and that can approximate, for a duration, drone signal control. You can send drones themselves with relays up. That is increasingly being done to help extend ranges and so forth. And this relay towers on the Belarusian border. I'm sure that's just the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure if I look into it, I'm sure there's many other things that Russia is doing to help, with correcting this advantage with Starlink control for drones that the Kiev regime has right now. But that is what Zelensky is so upset about. It's giving them a lot of problems because the Kiev regime started, Kiev regime / NATO, because of course NATO is directing this whole thing, the CIA and so forth. They openly bragged about this many times now, so it's not even a question. But the Kiev regime moved to a certain extent away from long-range strikes at Russian energy infrastructure because they weren't, they could create, pretty pillars of fire and everything, for the cameras and the PR, but they weren't really having any economic or strategic effect. So what they switched to in the past month is a war on logistics in Kherson and northern Crimea. That certainly I think it's worked better for them. Much worse of course, for the Russian forces and civilians there. And, must be said, I have family in Crimea. So, I heard some of it, of what's happening on the ground. And there has been problems with shortages of gasoline and other problems. But basically, the Kiev regime was going after everything: gas stations, every truck carrying gasoline, bridges, and everything. And Russia, of course, started to find, first of all, other avenues, the ferry network and other things to bring fuel into Crimea and to their forces in Novorossiya there. But they also brought in mobile drone interception teams all over the highway network there that was being targeted. But they also decided that in this case, the best defense was a good offense. And they started doing the same thing back to Kiev regime-controlled Ukraine, except possibly to a much greater degree. And they've been going after every gas station, every cargo truck on the road, because the Kiev regime, it has been, conclusively proven that the Kiev regime is launching drones out of cargo trucks now. So, right. Which of course is a war crime. It's disguising, something in a civilian, but that's been done all through this war. It was done during Operation Spiderweb. It's just being done to a much greater degree now. Well, the consequence is that Russia is hitting every single cargo truck on Ukrainian roads. They're also hitting bridges. They're hitting gas stations. They're hitting every Ukrainian postal system office and warehouse, both private and state, because the Kiev regime is using them as a logistics network to get their drones and other equipment all around the country. I've seen video of a big Ukrainian Nova Pochta truck that somehow they managed to squeeze a British APC into the back of it to move it around. So anyway, what we get as a result of all of this is there is now something very close to a total drone war going on across Ukraine right now, particularly on the eastern bank, but also a bit on the western bank now too. And these relay towers on the Belarusian border are helping Russia do this deeper into Ukraine, right? Including on the west side of Kiev, the traffic coming to and from Poland, right? Including NATO military equipment and supplies to a much greater degree than Russia has been able to do before, because now they have more drones. They have so many drones that they're able to use them very extensively like this now. And those assist in them doing this. And it's increasingly effective. For instance, in the Sumy region, at some point last week, the word was, again, coming from Ukrainian sources, that there wasn't a single functioning gas station left in the Sumy region because the had destroyed them all. It's a very total drone war of logistics, but logistics now encompassing most of the civilian sphere of what would be considered logistics as well. So it's nasty, and of course it's only going to get nastier as time goes on. But again, we're at something very close to a total war now. At least as far as the drone
war. I mean, like we only have
as far as the drones are concerned.
As far as the drones are concerned, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yes, we're not carpet bombing Kiev yet, right? And I
right. That's what I was going to say.
We're not using nukes, right? But a total drone war, right? There's very little now, if anything, that is safe from drones on both sides.
Mark, this is fascinating. You give fantastic breakdowns, man. I really do appreciate it. Mark Sloboda. You can find Mark on Boosty at Real Politics with Mark Sloboda, or you can find him just if you put in the name Mark Sloboda on Boosty, Boosty. All of his work appears there. He does fantastic analysis. Mark, thank you for this, man. You be safe, okay?
Thanks for having me.
Have a good one. Bye-bye. All right. And we have come to the end. And I saw, let's see, we have a chat. And this chat is from Jabari Media. And Jabari Media says, Jamal, good morning. I spoke with Andrei Telezhenko last Friday. He wished you good health also. Yeah, he hit me up and checked on me recently. It must have been after you met him. Yeah, I'm going to have to bring Andre back on. He was a damn good guest of the show. I just haven't had him since I've been back. Jabari, thank you for that. That is a $4.99 chat. You have my appreciation. And I'm going to say you can like, share, subscribe to this content. I will be on the program coming up pretty much now. Have a good one all. Be safe and be kind to the degree that you can be kind.